Axis Mundi. Chapter 1. Tonian. Carol scribbled some notes into the margins of the book he had in his lap. The others watched from their own positions, lounging on the deck of the ship and enjoying the feeling of the wind on their faces as Baul flew leisurely over the ocean below. The clear weather had brought with it the chill of late autumn, and Yuri was snuggled next to Rapide, while Raven held his heavy coat tightly around his shoulders. Judith didn't act affected by the cold, but every so often when no one was looking, she ran her hands up and down her bare arms to warm them. Patty leaned over Carol's shoulder, trying to get a glimpse of the text.
"Are you going to read us the answer or not? You're taking longer than the buildup of deep sea ooze."
"Give me a sec, will you?" Carol waved her away. "I want to make sure I have a record of everyone's answers. Okay, here's what it says." He stood up and held the book out in front of him as he read. "The color you chose reveals characteristics of your outward personality, the personality that you show to others. Those who chose warm colors can be friendly and outgoing, but also hot-headed and impulsive. Those who chose cool colors are more level-headed, but may be closed off around those they aren't familiar with. Earth tones signify gentle, grounded personalities, and people who chose black or white tend to be strict and by the book." Yuri groaned and leaned back against the side of the ship. Once again, a vague description that could apply to anybody. Face it, Carol, this isn't science. They're just writing these things for fun. Carol pouted and hugged the book to his chest. "You take that back! The Pythia Society is a guild that prides itself on its breakthroughs in psychology and probing the secrets of the mind. Aren't you cool and level-headed, but also closed off to people you don't know?" Yuri rolled his eyes. "That has nothing to do with blue being my favorite color, and you know it." "So what if it's fake?" Judith interrupted. "The point of these sorts of things is to have fun. If you accomplish that, does it matter whether it's accurate or not?" Yuri didn't answer right away, but Rapide whined and nudged his arm, and he sighed. "I guess." "What confuses me is," Raven broke in, "why anybody choose white as their favorite color? I mean, white ain't even really a color at all. It's no color." Judith laughed. "Actually, according to Estelle, white light contains all the colors in the visible spectrum. Technically speaking, white is all colors." "Judith, darling, have I ever told you how much I love a gal with a brain like yours?" "Yes, you've made it quite clear that my brain is the part of me you're most attracted to." Yuri groaned and raised one hand. "All right, Captain Carol. Next question, please." Carol nodded and flipped to the next page. "Question 4 is, if you were an animal, what animal would you be?"
"Ha! That's an easy one."
Patty had climbed up to the front of the ship and turned back to address the others.
"I'd be a mighty orca, ruler of the seas."
"An orca?" Judith repeated. "You mean like a killer whale?"
"Aye, that's the one."
Patty crossed her arms.
"The orca is the most powerful hunter in the sea. No prey is too much for it, not even whales. Cultures around the world revere it for its strength and worship it as an ocean deity. Why, some even perform funerary rites for beached orcas out of respect. Truly, there's no creature in the sea more befitting of a pirate queen like myself."
"Huh, interesting." Yuri sat up straight again, a smile returning to his face. "I figured you'd go for something cute, like a sea otter, but a killer whale suits you too." He glanced up at Judith. "How about you, Judy?"
This is a tough one. I'd like to say a dragon like Baul, but I suppose that doesn't count as an animal exactly. Perhaps then some kind of bird of prey? A falcon, maybe. They're intelligent and fast, with quick reflexes and sharp talons. I like their style. How about you, Carol?" Carol grinned.
I'd be a jaguarundi. They're shy and not much bigger than your normal domesticated cat, but they've got lots of different talents that other wild cats don't. They're fast, good at both climbing and swimming, and their secretive nature makes them all the more fascinating.
Very nice, Judith clapped. Trust Captain Carol to come up with an animal no one's ever heard of. Does Yuri also have something unique for us?
Yuri just shook his head. Sorry to disappoint, but I'd be satisfied being a normal dog. He reached over and began scratching Rapide behind the ear, watching the pup's tail swing back and forth as he continued. Dogs are strong and hard-working, but don't need to be flashy or do things in a fancy way. They live their own simple lives exactly the way they feel is best. What more could a guy want?
Judith giggled. Funny that Yuri would pick a dog and Carol a cat. I've always seen the two of you as just the opposite.
Huh? You think I'm like a dog? Carol stammered, almost dropping the book. Meanwhile, Yuri scowled and snapped indignantly. How dare you? I'm nothing like a cat.
Which is exactly what a cat would say, Patty added, shooting a smirk in response to Yuri's dirty look.
Raven was laughing the whole time, and finally he leaned over to give Yuri a pat on the back. Hey, don't get so mad. I never saw you as a cat, either. You seem more like a rabbit to me. Yuri turned back to him, too surprised to be angry. A rabbit? In what way? Well, maybe not all the time, but sure turn into one whenever Flynn comes a-knocking. You want to take a dive off the side of this boat, old man? This triggered a shoving match between the two, with Rapide in the middle trying to squeeze his way out of it. Judith laughed while Carol and Patty looked on, a confused frown on Carol's face. Turning into a rabbit? What does that even mean?
Oh, Carol, you sweet child.
Patty hopped down next to him and reached up to sling an arm around his shoulder. He was a head taller than she was, but that didn't affect her condescending attitude.
Almost 16 and still as pure as a white whale.
Don't make fun of me! Carol pulled away, running over to where Rapide had finally freed himself from the conflict and turned to watch. Raven, if you were an animal, what would you be? The two stopped arguing, and Raven leaned back to look up at Carol with a smile. You asking seriously? Or are you just trying to get a laugh out of an old man? What do you... Oh! Carol shook his head. That's not important. You can choose any animal you want.
Say, there's Torum Harbor now. We're almost there.
Judith pointed off the side of the ship, and the others moved to look. Yuri and Raven stood up and leaned over the side, while Patty hopped back up onto the bow. That's my port, she chimed, looking down at the harbor through her binoculars.
And my crew is docked and waiting for me there, just as they promised.
Judith walked over to stand beside the bow, and Patty jumped back down beside her. We're going to miss you, Judith spoke up, patting her on the head. It's been like old times having you around again.
Aye, Judith, these past few weeks have been more fun than a barrel of sea monkeys, but a good captain can't abandon her crew.
She turned around and headed back across the deck of the ship to where her belongings, along with a few boxes of archaeological treasures, were sitting near the gangplank.
Next time you hear rumors of treasure, you give old Patty a call.
Judith nodded. We will. Oh, wait, before we land. Carol broke in, waving his book above his head. Don't you want to hear the explanation about your animal choice?
Oh, that's right. I'd love to.
Yuri had walked around behind Carol and took the opportunity to snatch the book from his hands. By the time Carol realized what was going on, Yuri was already across the deck and handing the book to Patty. Here, do me a favor and take it with you. Yuri, that's mine! Patty gave a salute.
I'll take good care of it, Captain Carroll. Any present from Yuri is a priceless treasure, after all.
Oh, man. Baul touched down outside of town, and the group helped Patty carry her spoils back to the harbor and onto her ship. When they'd given a friendly farewell to her and her crew, they made their way back out of town and along the road beneath where Baul was hovering in wait for them. Once back in the air, the group took some time for themselves, Carol sulking about Yuri giving away his book, Judith chatting with Baul, and Rapide propping his front paws on the side of the ship so that he could lean his head into the wind. Yuri glanced between them, enjoying the quiet atmosphere for a moment, before a voice from the back of the ship caught his attention. He walked over to where Raven sat, hunched over their radio transceiver with the earpiece held against one ear. "Uh-huh. Yeah, we're headed that way now, actually. Yeah, over Torum. We can be there in about 20 minutes or so. Okay. Yep, we'll head right to Union headquarters as soon as we get in. Thanks for telling us. See you soon." Raven set the earpiece back down with a sigh and looked up at Yuri, extending one hand. "You mind helping an old man to his feet?" Yuri rolled his eyes, but took Raven's hand and helped him up anyway. "Who was that? Is something going on at headquarters?" "Yeah, that was Kaufman. Said she had a job for Brave Vesperia and needed to see us as soon as possible." "As soon as possible?" Yuri's expression fell. "Did she say what the job was about?" "Nope. Course that probably means it's something we wouldn't be too keen on doing if we knew ahead of time." Raven started over toward the bow of the ship, calling out, "Hey, Captain Carroll! I just got off the radio with the Union. Soon as we get into Dongrest, we're headed straight for headquarters, okay?" Carroll perked up, steadying himself against the side of the ship as he stood. "Oh, is Harry back early?" "Nope. Kaufman's got a job for us." "A job for Brave Vesperia, direct from the Union?" Judith asked, turning back around to face the others. "How exciting!" Yuri stood beside Rapide and leaned against the side of the ship. "Suspicious is more like it. Why'd she call us specifically?" "Isn't it obvious?" Carol asked, barely concealing his pride. "She knows from experience that our guild is more than capable of handling any task we're given." "Perhaps, but it sounds like this is time-sensitive, and that's never a good sign." "Aw, Yuri, lighten up," Raven offered, reaching out to give him a pat on the shoulder. "There's no point in worrying about it till we get there." "I guess so." Rapide barked in agreement, and Judith laughed again. "You heard them, Baul. Next stop, Dongrest." The sky had grown overcast by the time they arrived in Dongrest, but the streets were lively, the citizens bustling about with hushed excitement. There was an electricity to the air, an anticipation for something grand that was building with each passing minute. Carol couldn't help being swept along by the feeling, but Yuri was uncomfortable with it all. Is everybody really that excited for Harry to get back? "Yuri, you of all people should know how much it'll mean to everyone for us to have a Dawn again," Carol scolded. "It's a big deal." Yuri just shrugged, dodging a few passers-by along the side of the street. "But how is anything going to change? We've already been treating Harry like the Dawn." "Treating the kid like the Dawn and him actually being the Dawn are two totally separate things," Raven pointed out. "Guilds have always been big on the pomp and circumstance. No one wanted to admit it, but waiting until Harry came of age to inaugurate a new Dawn was putting a lot of stress on the Union. It'll be a load off everyone's mind once he's officially in power, not just that kid who's not quite old enough to be in charge but is anyway." Yuri scoffed. "After all the Union has been through, I just think they could have made an exception." Judith leaned over and nudged Yuri.
You miss Harry too, don't you?
That's not it. It has been 6 months since he left to train with Alltusk, Carol murmured. I'll bet he's going to be so much stronger when we see him tomorrow. I can't lose to him. Raven was at the head of the group for once, and he stopped on the front steps of the headquarters building to wait for the others to catch up. All right, kiddos, no more arguing. We've got a job to do, remember?
Yes, Uncle Raven,
Judith chimed, opening the door and motioning the others inside. Yuri, Carol, and Rapide filed in, but Raven stayed behind and reached for the door handle. After you, darling.
No, you go ahead.
Aw, don't be like that. A man's gotta show his respect for a beautiful lady.
But a lady must also show respect for her elders, shouldn't she?
Judith, darling, sometimes I can't tell if you're being serious or you're just teasing me. Yuri, stopped a few feet from the doorway, called back to interrupt them. All right, lovebirds, no more flirting. We've got a job to do, remember?
Yes, Uncle Yuri.
Judith let go of the door, allowing it to slam against Raven's shoulder as she passed him. He cringed and scrambled inside after them. Ow, that hurt! Wait for me, would ya? Raven managed to catch up with them as they began chatting with Kaufman, who was waiting patiently outside the Dawn's chambers. She hadn't worried about cordialities, and instead wasted no time in describing the situation. Received a delivery this morning. We weren't expecting anything today, especially not live cargo, but... Live cargo? Yuri murmured. Like an animal of some kind? No, even stranger. Kaufman pointed them towards the doorway to the Dawn's chambers. Come see for yourself. Just watch your step and keep your voice down. The group followed, uneasy with the way things were shaping up. Kaufman's description of even stranger, coupled with her warnings, brought up visions of monsters and Entelexia in Yuri's mind, and he was already puzzling over how to approach the situation. However, as they entered the chambers and passed the guild flags along the walls, he became aware of a distinct lack of monsters, and a large basket sitting at the end of the hall. I was called in after they discovered her, since I'm the only chief from the 5 master guilds currently in town, Kaufman was explaining in a hushed voice. Rodanthe would have been a better choice, but the Blood Alliance is out on a job, so I got stuck with this situation instead. Carol ran over to the basket and dropped to the floor beside it to examine its contents. A baby? He gasped, and Kaufman shushed him. Don't yell. You'll wake her. Oh, right, sorry. Rapide leaned over the basket, sniffing the child and nudging her face with his nose. The sensation caused her to stir, and Rapide jumped back as she let out a curious coo. He looked up at Yuri, as though wondering what to make of all this. Why would you call us specifically? Yuri asked, keeping his eyes on Kaufman, but giving Rapide a reassuring pat on the head. We're not a babysitting guild. No, you're not. Kaufman knelt down and pulled the child from the basket, adjusting the blankets around her so that her head was more visible. But you're reliable, discreet, and you have a Krityan member. Judith let out a gasp. She's... Now that the child's head was uncovered, the group could see her long, pointed ears, and the 2 short, downy antennae that extended from the back of her skull. Judith drew closer, and while Kaufman held the child out, she didn't move to take her. There was a note from the child's mother, asking the Union to care for her. I would have taken her to the local orphanage right away, but I don't know what kind of special care Krityan children need. That's why I called you here. I thought you might know more, or be able to refer me to someone who does. Carol and Raven had crowded in to get a better look at the child, who was staring wide-eyed from one person to another. "She's so tiny," Carol murmured. "She can't be more than a few weeks old." "Huh, I've never seen a Krityan with blonde hair before," Raven added. "Blue eyes, too. Are there Kritya with blue eyes?" Before anyone else could answer, Carol chimed in with a proud smile. "Actually, Raven, everyone's born with blue eyes. It isn't until they're a few months old that the iris gets enough pigment to turn a different shade. Judging by the gold flecks around her pupil, this little one is probably going to have hazel or brown eyes when she gets older." "Ooh, lucky gal. Hazel eyes are something special. Course she'll probably end up with those even prettier purple Krityan eyes." "No, she won't." Judith stepped in, leaning over the baby. "The reddish color of Krityan eyes is because of the different structure of their iris. Their eye color starts out red and may turn a darker shade of purple as they grow older, but it would never start out blue." "But," Carol stammered, "her ears and the antenna." "Even so, blonde hair isn't a Krityan trait either, is it?" Yuri asked. "Something's not right about this kid." The baby let out another curious coo, reaching out for the fabric of Carol's neckerchief. He placed a hand in the way, and her fingers wrapped around his thumb. "You don't think one of her parents is human, do you?" he murmured. "I didn't think that was possible," Yuri answered. "They're not genetically compatible, are they?" Carol hummed in thought. "Well, genetically speaking, they are different species, but sometimes hybrids can happen. Kritya have 48 chromosomes, while humans only have 46, Judith explained. "It's rare that a Krityan and a human pair could even conceive a child, and rarer still for that child to be brought to term. This little girl is the living embodiment of a 1 in a million chance." Carol watched as the baby reached her other hand up to grab at his fingers, his voice taking on a more reverent tone. "That's amazing. Who would just abandon a child so special?" "All children are special," Yuri corrected. "Abandoning a child, no matter their genetics, is an awful thing to do." Raven shrugged and shook his head. "Hey, sometimes it's more complicated than that. There are all kinds of reasons why parents would give up a kid. Maybe the tyke is better off this way. Our job ain't to judge. It's to figure out how to give this kid a better life." "Raven's right," Judith agreed with a nod. "We may seek to punish the unjust, but if we refuse to actually help those who are suffering, then we become the unjust." She left Kaufman's side and began to pace back and forth next to the windows. "Our first step should be to take the child to a doctor who treats Kritya. We should have her examined to determine how much of her physiology is Krityan and what kind of needs she has as a result." "Do you have a specific doctor in mind?" Kaufman asked. "Well, there's a doctor in Myorzo, but that would require Baul to track down Kronez, which isn't always the fastest process. There's a Krityan doctor in Zaphias that has a good reputation. Perhaps we should take the baby there." "Yeah!" Carol exclaimed. "Estelle and Rita are in the capital right now, too. They're good with kids, aren't they? We could ask them for help taking care of her overnight, and then bring her back to Dongres tomorrow morning." Yuri glanced at Judith and Raven, then sighed. "Hey, if it helps this kid find a good home, I'm all for it. Just don't expect me to be the one changing all the diapers." "Don't worry, Yuri." Judith patted him on the shoulder. "We'll leave Raven in charge of that." "Hey! For the kid's sake, I don't think you want to do that." "President," Carol began, looking over at Kaufman, "did the note that was left with you tell you her name? I hate to keep calling her the kid or the baby." Kaufman tightened the blankets around the baby and handed her over to Carol, making sure that he was properly supporting her head. No, there was no name given in the note. Since you all are taking care of her, you should give her a name. Us? Name her? Carol's grip on the child tightened, and he had to relax when she started to whine. Is that okay? Why not? Yuri shrugged. You said yourself we can't keep calling her the kid. He's right. Judith stepped closer to Carol, looking over his shoulder at the baby. Someone needs to think of a name for her. Raven's hand shot up. Oh, pick me! I've got a good one! Captain Carol? Yuri interrupted. You're our name guy, right? Give her a good name. Just gonna ignore the old man, are ya? I swear. Carol looked between Yuri and Raven before turning his attention back to the baby. I know I like coming up with names, but to name an actual person... I wonder, Judith began, if she should have a human name or a Krityan name. What do you think, Carol? I think... Raven tried to break in again, but Yuri tugged on the back of his shirt to quiet him so that Carol could focus. Well... Carol frowned, staring at the baby and locking eyes with her as he thought it over. Human or Krityan? A name for someone who's both... He let out a sigh and closed his eyes. Maybe someone who's both human and Krityan should have a name that isn't either. With her golden hair, it makes me think, what about Bellius? The rest of the group went quiet, glancing around at one another. The baby, however, seemed pleased, and let out a squeal as she reached up toward Carol again. Judith smiled. I think she likes it. Bellius. Raven let out a sigh. Not what I would have picked, but it's a good name. Bellius it is, then. Yuri approached Carol, leaning over the baby and smiling down at her. It's nice to meet you, Belle. Belle! Carol repeated. In the name of the brightest star in the sky, Brave Vesperia, we accept your job. Yuri stifled a laugh. I appreciate your enthusiasm, Captain Carol, but maybe you should formally accept the job from Kaufman instead. Oh, Carol spun around on his heel to face Kaufman. Right! In the name of the brightest star in the sky, Brave Vesperia, we accept this job! I knew I could count on you guys, Kaufman replied. We'll look forward to hearing your report tomorrow. The group gathered up the supplies that the Fortunes Market members had already purchased, and set Belle comfortably back in the basket so that they could transport her more easily. It began raining as they walked back out to the edge of town for Baul to pick them up, and while Raven complained about going from one job to another without any time to rest, no one really took him seriously. They piled into the cabin of the ship as Baul took off, and Carol made Belle comfortable in the bassinet while the others chatted around him. It's been a while since we've seen Estelle and Rita, Judith commented from her spot on one of the upper bunks. It's a shame that it takes a job to get us all together again. Yuri was sitting against the wall by the staircase, Rapide curled up by his side. I think so too, but they're so excited about the work they're doing with the new energy initiative, I don't have the heart to take them away from it. Flynn, too. Speaking of which, Raven chimed, I take it you'll be bunking with the Commandant tonight, Yuri? Actually, Flynn's in Heliord right now, overseeing the Tolbekian mining operations. Oh, too bad, Judith responded with exaggerated pity. Poor Yuri will be so lonely sleeping in the capital all by himself. Yuri rolled his eyes. Very funny, guys. I'm really not in the mood to talk to Flynn right now anyway, so it's not a big deal. Did something happen? Carol asked, turning around in his chair. It's nothing, Yuri replied. Just a little disagreement is all. Raven gave a scolding "Tch." A lover spat, huh? I guess even the most lovey-dovey pair ain't immune to those sorts of things.
It's not...
Yuri began, half rising to his feet, before thinking better of it and sitting back down. And who are you calling lovey-dovey, anyway? Raven just laughed. Yuri, my boy, I'd kill for a woman to love me as much as you and Flynn love each other.
Judith leaned over the side of the bunk. Who would you be willing to kill?
For you, Judith, darling? Anybody.
As nice as that sounds, it'd be cheaper to go DIY. Undying adoration is a little too steep a price for something I could easily do myself.
Oh, Judith, come on now.
Carol ignored them and leaned his chair back as he looked to Yuri. You know, if something's bothering you, you can always talk to us. We're your friends. We may not be able to solve your problem, but we can help you through it.
Thanks, Carol. Yuri nodded in response. I'm fine, but it's nice to know I've got you in my corner. And I do have some things I'd like to talk to you about soon. Just some questions about guild stuff. Before Yuri had finished his sentence, a sharp wail pierced the conversation, and Belle began to cry loudly. Raven covered his ears, and Rapide whined. Carol, meanwhile, rushed to Belle's side.
Oh, hey! What's wrong? What is it? Come on, Belle, it's okay.
Yuri glanced up at Judith with a frown, and mouthed the words, "What have we gotten ourselves into?" Judith smiled. "We can handle it. It's only overnight." Overnight? Yuri closed his eyes and heaved a sigh. Somehow, I get the feeling it won't be that easy.